That shape. Once you see it, you never forget it. I've talked to dozens of World War II vets, Army, Navy, even a former Luftwaffe pilot who surrendered in 1945, and every single one lights up when they describe the first time they saw a P-38. Looked like nothing God ever made. One old Air Corps pilot told me over coffee last year, his fingers joints white from squeezing his mug like he was gripping a control stick again. I was patrolling over Tunisia, saw that forked tail out of the corner of my eye, and thought, we're done. Germany built a secret weapon, till I zoomed in and saw the stars and bars. Never felt so relieved in my life. In a sky full of familiar single-engine silhouettes, the curved wings of a Spitfire, the stubby nose of a P-40, the lightning was an alien. A beautiful, deadly question mark written across the clouds. Pilots on both sides did a double-take. Ground crews stopped greasing engines just to stare, wiping their hands on oily overalls. But every line of it, from that needle-sharp nose to the twin rudders slicing the wind, was an argument. An argument against how things are done. This is that story, how a bunch of California engineers scribbled it on a drafting table at 3 a.m., fueled by burnt coffee and a hatred for good enough. How it got bloodied in dogfights over Tunisia's desert dunes and Guadalcanal's jungle skies. And how it pulled off a mission so crazy, the guys who flew it still shook their heads 50 years later, saying, we never thought we'd make it back. It's not just a plain story. It's a story about guys who refused to say impossible, even when the sky itself was trying to kill them. To get why the lightning was so radical, let's step into that smoke-filled meeting room at Wright Field, Ohio, early 1937. The air smells like cigar smoke and desperation. You can almost taste the tension. The U.S. Army Air Corps brass. Guys with stars on their shoulders, their uniforms pressed so sharp they could cut paper, are sweating. Not from the heat, the heater's broken, typical government issue. A janitor tried to fix it that morning and only made the pipe leak. But from fear. They're reading reports from Europe. Hitler's Luftwaffe is building bombers by the thousands, Heinkel 111s, Dornier 17s, planes that can fly from Berlin to London and back without refueling, dropping 2,000 pounds of bombs on civilian neighborhoods. And America's fighters? The P-36 Hawk? Top speed 310 miles per hour. Slow enough that a German bomber could outrun it. The P-40? It can't climb higher than 18,000 feet, meaning German bombers could fly over it like it was standing still. They need an interceptor. A plane that can scramble in 5 minutes flat, hit 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet, and still have enough gas to patrol 200 miles of the East Coast. You can imagine how crazy that sounded in 1937. Most cars couldn't hit 80 miles per hour, and commercial planes flew at 10,000 feet. They're asking for a flying rocket. One general, General Henry Hap Arnold, later head of the Army Air Forces, slams his fist on the table so hard, his coffee mug jumps. We need a plane that can meet the enemy before he meets us, he growls. That's not just a specs list. That's a plea to avoid the bloodbath they see coming in Europe. So they wrote up Circular Proposal X608. It read like a kid's Christmas list to Santa. 360 miles per hour at 20k feet. Climb to altitude in under 6 minutes, 60 minutes of loiter time, and enough armor to protect the pilot from .50 caliber fire. The big names, Curtis Bell Seversky, looked at it and thought, we can tweak what we have. Curtis drew a P-40 with a bigger engine, calling it the P-40B. It only went 330 miles per hour. Bell added a supercharger to their P-39 Airacobra, but the supercharger was so heavy, the plane couldn't climb any faster. Safe, incremental changes, the kind of stuff that gets approved by committees who don't want to rock the boat. But here's the problem. Safe doesn't win wars. When Germany invaded Poland 2 years later, in 1939, those tweaks would have been obsolete. The Air Corps knew it, too. One colonel, a combat vet from World War I, told a subordinate over a beer, if we keep playing it safe, we'll be fighting with biplanes when the Nazis cross the Atlantic. They needed a revolution, not a renovation. And revolution doesn't come from big companies with shareholder meetings worrying about quarterly profits. It comes from small teams with something to prove, guys who'd rather fail spectacularly than succeed boringly. Enter Lockheed. Not the giant we know today. Back then, it was a 200-person shop in Burbank, California, run out of a converted furniture factory. The walls were lined with old oak tables they'd turned into drafting boards. You could still see the scratch marks from furniture makers under the blueprints. The heat worked when it felt like it, which was never in winter. And the coffee pot was always on, burnt, bitter stuff, but strong enough to keep engineers awake at 2 a.m. The star there was 27-year-old Clarence Kelly Johnson, 5 feet 6 inches, wire-thin, with a voice like gravel from too much coffee and too many arguments, and a temper that could melt metal. His team called him the Razor because he cut through BS faster than AP-38 cut through zeros. When Johnson first saw the X608 spec sheet, he didn't see a challenge, he saw a cage. A single big engine? It'd be so heavy the plane would handle like a truck with flat tires. Wing-mounted guns? You'd have to lead the target by 10 feet to hit anything, and if one wing gun jammed, you were useless. "This is garbage," he told his right-hand man, Hall Hibbard, crumpling the spec sheet and tossing it in the trash. Hibbard, a quiet guy who designed planes since World War I. He built biplanes that flew over the Western Front. Nodded slowly, pushing his glasses up his nose. "So what's the fix?" Johnson grinned, grabbed a pencil and a napkin from the break room. It had a donut stain on it, and drew 2 engines side by side. "We stop fighting physics. We use them." Hat napkin, stained with jelly donut and covered in pencil marks, became the blueprint for the P-38. Johnson's team, Hibbard Willis Hawkins, a 24-year-old engineer who just graduated from MIT, and a kid named Ben Rich, who'd later run Lockheed's Skunk Works and design the F-117 stealth fighter, worked 18-hour days for 3 straight weeks. They lived on coffee, donuts from the shop down the street, and the thrill of breaking every rule in aviation. Twin engines in a fighter? Heresy. Everyone knew twin-engine fighters were slow, clumsy beasts, good for bombing runs or patrols, not dogfights. But Johnson had his eye on the new Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engine. It was compact, about the size of a refrigerator, powerful 1,200 horsepower each, and just reliable enough to gamble on. 2 Allisons meant redundancy. If one died over the Pacific, you could glide 50 miles to a carrier or an island instead of ditching in the ocean. It meant raw power, 2,400 total horsepower, enough to push the plane past 400 miles per hour once they tweaked the wing design. Why fly on 1 engine when you can fly on 2? Johnson asked a skeptical Air Corps inspector who showed up to shut down the project. "It's like wearing 1 shoe, stupid, and you're gonna fall on your face." The inspector didn't laugh, he was a by-the-book guy, but he leaned over the prototype model and said, "Build it, but if it crashes, don't come crying to me." The XP-38 was born in that sweaty Burbank factory. With the team bolting parts together at night, they couldn't afford to shut down the furniture making during the day, and testing them at dawn over the California desert. Now, the big question, where to put 2 engines without turning the plane into a flying brick? If you stuck them on the wings of a regular fuselage, the weight would pull the wings apart mid-flight, like trying to hold 2 bowling balls by a string. So Hawkins, the young MIT grad, had an idea at 3 a.m. one night, while he was staring at a model plane he'd built as a kid. "Tail booms," he mumbled, scribbling on a paper bag. 2 long, hollow beams extending back from the engine nacelles, each housing a vertical stabilizer and rudder. It sounded crazy until they built a balsa wood model. When they blew on it with a leaf blower, it stayed straight, no wobbling. The booms made the plane rigid as a rock. No more shaking in turbulence that could tear a single-tail plane apart. They freed up the entire nose, usually stuffed with an engine, for what would become the plane's most fearsome feature, its weapons. And here's the stroke of genius that made the Lightning unbeatable. They fit the General Electric turbo superchargers inside the tail booms. Those superchargers were the P-38's secret weapon, but in other fighters they hung off the side like a backpack, creating drag and ruining aerodynamics. Johnson's team tucked them neatly into the booms, with tiny intercooler ducts that cooled the compressed air before it hit the engines, like a built-in AC for the engine. It was a packaging masterpiece. When the first XP-38 rolled out of the factory in 1939, the team stood back and stared. "It looks like it's going 100 miles per hour just sitting there," Rich said, tapping the nose. He wasn't wrong. Even the test pilot, Benny Howard, a famous race pilot, said, "This thing doesn't just look fast, it feels fast." Let's break down that turbo supercharger because it's the real reason the P-38 ruled the sky, and it's the detail most people miss. At 30,000 feet, the air's so thin, a regular engine gasps for oxygen. Like trying to run a marathon at the top of Mount Everest, where the air is 60% thinner than at sea level. A turbo supercharger fixes that. It's a turbine-driven device that uses the engine's hot exhaust gases, the same stuff that comes out of your car's tailpipe, to spin a fan, which shoves more air into the engine cylinders. It's a super lung for the plane. In the Spitfire, this gadget hung off the side of the engine, bulky, draggy, and easy to shoot off. In the P-38, it was hidden inside the tail boom, cool and protected, with ducts that barely added any drag. The result? At 25,000 feet, the Lightning's engines made 90% of their sea-level power. A Spitfire at that altitude? Only 50%. Its engine would sputter like a lawnmower out of gas. A P-40? Barely 40%, it could barely climb past 20,000 feet. I talked to a P-38 ace once, Jim Goodson, who flew over Europe and the Pacific. He was 92 when we met, but his eyes lit up when he talked about the Lightning's altitude advantage. You'd climb up to 30K, and the other guys, Germans, Japanese, would be struggling just to stay in the air, he said. I'd hit the throttle, and the Lightning would leap like a greyhound. The Germans never saw me coming. By the time they heard my engines, I'd already shot them down. That's not just engineering. That's cheating fairly. The P-38 didn't just fly higher. It flew better higher, faster higher, and deadlier higher. And that nose? Empty of an engine. It became a gunner's wildest dream. No, scratch that. It was a gunner's nightmare for anyone on the receiving end. The Army Air Corps crammed in a 20mm Hispano autocannon. This thing fired shells the size of your thumb, packed with explosive, capable of blowing a hole through a bomber's armor plate, and 4.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, each firing 800 rounds per minute, enough to cut through a fighter's fuselage like a chainsaw through butter. All of them fired straight ahead, no wing-mounted convergence needed, no guessing where the bullets would meet. The pilot put the T-1 gun sight, a new innovation, bright enough to see in sunlight even at 30K feet, on the target and squeezed the trigger. A torrent of steel, from explosive 20mm shells to armor-piercing .50 caliber rounds, would walk straight down the sight line. One P-38 pilot, Bill Leverett, described it as holding a fire hose of lead that never misses. Let's put it in perspective to really drive this home. A P-40 had 6.50 calories, but they were in the wings. You had to be exactly 300 yards away, dead on target, to hit anything. A P-38? You could be 500 yards out, flying through turbulence, and the rounds would still punch holes in the enemy's engine. I shot down a FW-190 once over France, Goodson told me, leaning forward in his chair. I was 400 yards behind him, put the crosshairs on his left engine, and pressed the button. His plane blew up before he could even turn his head. It was like shooting fish in a barrel, but the fish had guns. By 1943, the P-38's nose guns were so feared, the Luftwaffe issued a memo to all pilots. If you see a fork-tailed plane above you, dive immediately. Do not engage. Do not attempt to outclimb it. Dive, and hope it doesn't follow. That's respect wrapped in pure fear. But genius on paper is one thing. Metal and flesh and sky? That's where the real test begins, and the XP-38 was a handful bordering on lethal. Let's talk about compressibility, the monster that killed test pilots. When the plane hit 500 miles per hour in a dive, the air over the thick wings would break, what engineers call shock waves, slamming the control stick forward and locking it in place. It was like the sky was grabbing the plane and shoving it into the ground, and there was nothing the pilot could do. Test pilot Ralph Verdon learned that the hard way in 1941. He was diving over California's Mojave Desert, pushing the XP-38 to its limits, when the controls locked. He radioed back, "I can't pull up. She's gone," before his plane disintegrated on impact. The team was devastated. Verdon was a friend, not just a pilot, but Johnson didn't quit. He spent 2 weeks poring over wind tunnel data, then modified the wing leading edge, adding a tiny dive flap, about the size of a book, that smoothed the airflow. It worked. On the next test, the pilot dove to 550 miles per hour and pulled up easily. Next problem, torque. If one engine died, the plane would yaw so hard to one side, a rookie pilot would crash before they could react, like trying to ride a bike with one wheel locked. Johnson fixed that by adding counter-rotating propellers. One spun clockwise, the other counterclockwise, cutting torque by 70%. Still, the P-38 demanded skill, real skill. You had 2 throttles, 2 propeller pitch controls, 2 sets of engine temperature and oil pressure gauges, and a turbo supercharger switch for each engine. Flying it was like juggling 6 balls at once while standing on a skateboard, said pilot Rex Barber, who flew the Yamamoto mission. Drop one, and you're dead. The cockpit was cramped. If you were over 6 feet tall, you had to slouch, and your knees would press against the instrument panel. It was noisy enough to make your ears ring for days. Pilots wore thick leather headphones, but they still came home with tinnitus. But the guys who mastered it, they loved it. It was a bitch, Barber said with a grin. But it was my bitch, and she always had my back. Then came the war. The first P-38s landed in England in 1942, codenamed Lightning. The British thought it sounded tough. The British pilots, used to Spitfires that handled like sports cars, responsive and nimble, looked at this big, strange plane with its twin tails and snub nose and laughed. Fork-tailed monster, they called it, sneering over pints at the base pub. The jokes stopped when the Lightning started killing. Let's set the scene. September 12, 1942. Over the English Channel. Lieutenant Paul Bear is flying patrol, bored out of his mind. He's been staring at nothing but gray water for 2 hours. Then he sees it, a dark speck on the horizon. A FW-200 Condor, a German maritime bomber that sunk 20 Allied ships that month alone, including the SS City of Benares, a passenger ship carrying 90 children. 77 died when the Condor torpedoed it. Bear's blood boils. He lost his little brother in a car crash, and the thought of those kids dying makes his hands shake. He climbs 10,000 feet above the Condor, using the Lightning's altitude advantage, rolls over, and dives. The plane hits 450 miles per hour, the wind screaming past the canopy. The Condor's gunner spots him, opens fire. Tracer rounds zip past Bear's head, but Bear's already on target. He squeezes the trigger and the nose guns roar. The 20mm cannon rips through the Condor's left fuel tank, and the bomber erupts in a fireball, pieces falling into the channel like burning confetti. Bear pulls up, grinning so hard his cheeks hurt. That's for the kids, he says to himself, tapping the instrument panel. The Luftwaffe heard about it. Their pilots started radioing in reports of a fork-tailed devil that could outclimb and outshoot anything. They gave it a name, Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, respect, wrapped in fear, and it stuck. But Europe wasn't the Lightning's playground. The clouds were low and thick. The English Channel is famous for its fog. The skies crowded with bombers and fighters, and the P-38's complexity bit it hard. The turbo superchargers froze in the cold. Damp air? The booms weren't insulated yet. Oil lines clogged, and the plane's electrical system shorted out in rain. It did fine, shot down its share of Germans, but it didn't shine. Then came the Pacific. Oh, the Pacific, sunny skies, endless ocean, tiny islands separated by hundreds of miles of open water. This is where the P-38 became a legend. Picture it, you're a pilot on Guadalcanal and you get an order to escort B-17s to Rabaul, a Japanese stronghold 300 miles away. The P-40 can't make the round trip. It'd run out of fuel 100 miles short. The P-51? Early models haven't arrived yet, and they top out at 800 miles. The P-38? With 265-gallon drop tanks slung under its wings, it can fly 1,300 miles. That's like flying from New York to Miami, then turning around and fighting a dogfight before heading home. It was a game changer, the kind that makes generals smile. In 1943, the Allies started bombing Rabaul, and the B-17s were getting slaughtered. Japanese Zeros would pick them off like sitting ducks, flying circles around them and shooting at the engines. Then the P-38s showed up, flying 600 miles round trip, and everything changed. One B-17 gunner, Frank Miller, wrote home to his mom. These fork-tailed guys showed up today, and the Zeros ran like scared rabbits. I watched one Lightning take on 3 Zeros, shot down 2, and the third flew away so fast, I thought his engine would explode. We made it home that day because of them. Tell Dad I want a P-38 model for Christmas. The Lightning didn't just escort bombers. It became the backbone of the Pacific Air War. The Lightning became the Swiss Army knife of the Pacific. There was nothing it couldn't do. It hunted Japanese supply barges, called Tokyo taxis by the Allies, along the Solomon Islands. These wooden barges carried food and ammo to Japanese troops, and a single 20mm burst from a P-38 would turn them into kindling, sending rice and bullets floating into the ocean. It shot down Japanese reconnaissance planes before they could spot Allied fleets. One P-38 pilot, Dick Bong, shot down a Japanese Ki-46 Dyna scout plane 500 miles from Guadalcanal, preventing the Japanese from learning about a U.S. carrier group heading to the area. It even did ground attack, strafing Japanese airfields on Guadalcanal at dawn. Pilots would fly low, so close to the ground that they could see Japanese soldiers running for cover, and rake the runways with .50 caliber fire, destroying zero after zero before they could take off. The Japanese hated it. They had nothing that could match its range or firepower. The Zero was nimble. Sure, it could turn tighter than a P-38, but it couldn't climb as fast. The Lightning climbed 3,000 feet per minute, the Zero only 2,000, and it couldn't fly as high. The Zero topped out at 32,000 feet, the Lightning at 44,000. A P-38 pilot would use the boom and zoom tactic. Climb high above the Zeros, dive at 400 miles per hour, hit them with the nose guns, then zoom back up into the sun out of reach. No turning, no dogfighting, just hit and run. The Zero was a knife, said Bong, the top American ace of the war. Small, sharp, good for close fights. The Lightning was a sledgehammer, big, powerful, and you didn't need to be fancy with it. You don't bring a knife to a sledgehammer fight. Bong would know. He scored 40 kills in a P-38, more than any other American pilot. He painted his plane with a little Japanese flag for each kill, and named it Marge after his girlfriend back home. He'd write her letters every night, telling her about the Lightning. She's not pretty, but she's tough. She gets me home every time. That's the thing about the P-38. It wasn't just a machine. It was a part of the pilots' lives, a trusted friend that kept them alive when everything else wanted them dead. Which brings us to Tommy Lanfear. If Bong was the P-38's greatest ace, Lanfear was its biggest cheerleader. Charismatic, loud, with a grin that could charm a snake and a habit of wearing a red scarf in his cockpit, he said it made him hard to miss. He commanded the 339th Fighter Squadron, the Hellcats, on Guadalcanal. He hated the P-40s his unit flew first. When the first P-38 landed on Henderson Field in late 1942, he ran out of the command tent and kissed the nose, much to the amusement of the ground crew. "This is the plane that's going to win the war," he told his men at the next briefing, slamming his fist on the map. Lanfear wasn't just a pilot, he was a tactician, and he hated the idea of turning with zeros, which was suicide. So he invented the slashing pass tactic, which became standard for P-38 units. Climb to 25,000 feet, dive at 400 miles per hour, hit the enemy with your nose guns before they even see you, then use the lightning speed to zoom back up into the sun. "You don't dance with a Zero," he'd yell in briefings, pacing back and forth. "You punch him in the face and walk away. No small talk, no rematches." His squadron's kill rate jumped 300% once they adopted his tactics, from 5 kills a month to 15. One of his best pilots was Rex Barber, quiet, steady, the opposite of Lanfear. Barber didn't talk much. He'd rather clean his gun sight than tell war stories. But he shot straight. Literally. He had the best accuracy in the squadron, never missing a target when he had a clear shot. Lanfear called him my right hand, and always put him on the most important missions. "Rex doesn't say much, but he gets the job done," Lanfear told his executive officer. "If I need someone to shoot a mosquito out of the air at 500 yards, I pick Rex." Together, they were a deadly team. Lanfear the loud leader, Barber the quiet killer. And in April 1943, they got the mission of a lifetime, one that would make the P-38 famous around the world. Let's set the stage. Mid-April 1943. The Allies are pushing up the Solomon Islands, but the Japanese are still tough. They hold Rabaul, and their navy controls the waters around Bougainville. Then, a miracle codebreakers at Frupak, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, in Hawaii. Working in a windowless room lit by fluorescent lights, cracked a Japanese purple cipher message. The purple cipher was the Japanese military's top-secret code. They thought it was unbreakable, but the U.S. had broken it 2 years earlier. The message was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's itinerary. Yamamoto wasn't just any admiral. He was the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, the man who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, the strategic brain of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Japanese called him the Eagle of the Pacific because he saw farther than anyone else. The message was detailed, almost arrogant. He'd fly from Rabaul to Balali Airfield on April 18 at 9:45 in one of 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zero fighters, flying at 10,000 feet. It was like getting a text message with someone's exact location, time, and mode of transportation, except this someone was the man who'd killed 2,400 Americans at Pearl Harbor. The codebreakers sent the message to Admiral Chester Nimitz's headquarters in Hawaii, marked Top Secret, Eyes Only. Nimitz read it, sat back in his chair, and picked up the phone. He reportedly called President Franklin D. Roosevelt directly. This part is debated by historians, but it makes the story better. "Mr. President, we have a shot at Yamamoto," Nimitz said. Roosevelt's reply, according to aides, was short and to the point. "Get him." Operation Vengeance was born. This wasn't just a mission. It was payback for December 7, 1941, for the sailors burning on the Arizona, for the nurses tending to the wounded, for every American who'd lost a loved one in the war. It was personal. But here's the catch. The intercept point over the jungle of Bougainville was 435 miles from the nearest Allied base at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. That's a long way, too long for every other fighter in the Pacific. The P-40? It had run out of fuel 100 miles short of the intercept, forcing the pilot to ditch in the ocean. The P-51? Not yet deployed to the Pacific, it was still fighting in Europe. Only the P-38 Lightning had the legs to make the round trip, and it was tight. The pilots would need to fly at exactly 160 miles per hour, no faster or they'd burn fuel. No slower or they'd miss the intercept, use every drop of fuel in the drop tanks, and glide the last 10 miles back to Henderson Field if they had to. They'd have to cut every corner. No unnecessary maneuvers, no radio calls, no mistakes. The plan was risky, bordering on suicidal. If they missed the intercept by even 5 minutes, Yamamoto's planes would be on the ground, and they'd have wasted fuel for nothing. If they were spotted early by Japanese radar, the Zeros would tear them apart before they could reach the bombers. But Nimitz gave the go-ahead. He told his staff, "Yamamoto is worth 10 destroyers. He's the brain of the Japanese Navy. We take this shot, even if it costs us all 18 planes." The job went to the 339th Fighter Squadron, Lanfear's Hellcats. They were the best P-38 unit in the Pacific with the most experience and the highest kill rate. Lanfear was in the mess hall, eating a plate of powdered eggs, when the operations officer found him. "Lanfear briefing room now. Top secret." Lanfear slammed his fork down, stood up, and ran. When he heard the mission, he grinned. "Boys," he said to his pilots, "we're gonna make history, and we're gonna make the Japanese regret December 7th. The plan was a masterpiece of precision and nerve, crafted by Major John Mitchell, the 339th's operations officer and maybe the best formation navigator in the Pacific. Mitchell was a quiet guy, not like Lanfear. He'd rather study a map than yell in a briefing room, but he had an uncanny ability to find his way anywhere. Pilots joked that he could find a coconut on an empty ocean using just a compass and a watch. The plan? 18 Lightnings total. 4 kill team planes? Lanfear, Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, a hotshot from Texas, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine, the youngest pilot in the squadron, 21 years old. Their sole job: ignore the Zeros, fly straight for the Betty bombers, and destroy them no matter what. 14 cover team planes, led by Mitchell himself. Their job: climb 5,000 feet above the kill team, engage the Zeros, and keep them busy while Lanfear and Barber did their work. The route? A long, low arc over the Solomon Sea, 50 feet above the waves. On the deck, as pilots say, to stay beneath Japanese radar, which could only detect planes above 1,000 feet. No radio contact, the Japanese would pick up the signal. No lights, no talking, just hand signals and eye contact. Navigation would be by compass, clock, and Mitchell's gut. For 2 hours. One wrong turn, one miscalculation in wind speed, and they'd either miss the intercept or run out of fuel and ditch in the ocean hundreds of miles from help. Mitchell gathered the pilots around a map, his finger tracing the route. "We fly like ghosts," he said, his voice steady. "If anyone sees us before the intercept, fisherman, Japanese patrol boat, even a seagull, we abort. No heroics. This mission is too important." Lanfear pulled Barber aside after the briefing, clapping him on the shoulder. "Rex, you take the lead, Betty. That's the one with Yamamoto. I'll take the second one. Don't let me down." Barber nodded, his face serious. "I won't. You watch my 6. April 18th, 1943. Guadalcanal. The air is thick with humidity, you can almost chew it, and your shirt sticks to your back within minutes of stepping outside. The pilots eat a quiet breakfast in the mess hall. Powdered eggs, they taste like cardboard, burnt toast, and lukewarm coffee. No one's laughing, no one's telling jokes. They know it's a big mission. Mitchell told them it's a target of extreme importance. But they don't know the target is Yamamoto. That secret stayed locked in Nimitz's headquarters until after the war. Lanfear writes a quick letter to his wife, Margaret, on a scrap of paper. "I love you more than anything. If I don't come back, know I died doing something that will help end the war. Tell the kids their dad was proud." He folds it up and tucks it in his flight jacket, next to a photo of Margaret and their 2 daughters. Barber doesn't write a letter. He's not much for words, but he polishes his T1 gun sight for the 10th time, wiping it with a clean rag until he can see his reflection in it. He's a perfectionist, and he wants every part of his plane to be perfect. At 7:25, the first lightning roars down Henderson Field's dusty runway. The engines cough blue smoke. The Allisons always do that when cold, then roar to life, shaking the ground. The plane's loaded with 310 gallons of fuel. So heavy, it struggles to get off the ground, the tires kicking up clouds of red dust. Lieutenant Joe Moore, one of the cover team pilots, has a problem. His drop tanks fail to feed fuel into the engine's mid-taxi. He slams his fist on the instrument panel, swearing, but there's nothing he can do. The ground crew tries to fix it, but time's running out. Moore has to turn back, tears in his eyes. He's been begging for a mission like this for months. "Go get him!" He yells to Lanfear as his plane flies past, waving his cap. The 17 remaining Lightnings form up in a tight V formation, skimming the waves so close that the pilots can see fish jumping in the water below. At 9:34, exactly on schedule, thanks to Mitchell's navigation, a crewman in Mitchell's plane yells over the intercom, pointing north, his voice cracking with excitement. "Tally-ho! 2 Bettys, 6 Zeros, 10 o'clock high." Everyone tenses. There they are, tiny specks in the sky at first, then growing larger. The 2 Betty bombers, their distinctive glass noses glinting in the sun, and 6 Zeros buzzing around them like angry hornets, their red circles visible even from a distance. The trap is sprung. Mitchell's voice comes over the radio, sharp and clear. They use a low power frequency, hoping the Japanese don't pick it up. "Drop tanks. Climb. Attack." The heavy auxiliary tanks are jettisoned, splashing into the sea with a loud hiss that the pilots can hear even over the engines. Instantly, the Lightnings feel 600 pounds lighter, agile as cats. They point their noses up and climb with a ferocious rate of climb, 10,000 feet in 90 seconds, that the Zeros can't match. The Japanese pilots are shocked. They didn't see the Lightnings coming, the low altitude worked, and they're scrambling to react. The Zeros peel off from the Bettys, diving to meet the cover team. The 2 Betty bombers, realizing the danger, drop their altitude and dive for the jungle canopy below, trying to hide in the trees of Bougainville. Lanfear yells over the radio to Barber, "Rex, go! I've got your 6. No Zero's gonna touch you." Barber pushes his throttle forward all the way, his Lightning surging ahead of the others. The wind howls, the G-forces press him into his seat, and his eyes are locked on the lead Betty. This is it, the moment they've trained for, the moment that will change the war. What happens next is 2 minutes of chaos. Over in the blink of an eye, but argued about by historians for 70 years. The cover team and Zeros mix it up in a chaotic dogfight, tracers crisscrossing the sky like red laser beams. One Zero breaks through the cover and fires at Barber's plane. Bullets tear through his tail boom, leaving holes the size of quarters, but he doesn't flinch. He's locked onto the lead Betty, his T-1 sight centered on its right engine. He closes to 300 yards, so close he can see the Japanese pilot in the Betty's cockpit, looking back at him in terror. Barber squeezes the trigger, and his nose guns roar. 20mm shells and .50 caliber rounds tear into the Betty's engine. The engine erupts in flames, black smoke pouring from it like a storm cloud. The Betty pilot tries to crash land in the jungle, yanking the plane left and right, but the wing snaps off when it hits a tree. The plane slams into the ground, exploding in a ball of fire that can be seen for miles. Meanwhile, Lanfear is chasing the second Betty. A Zero dives at him from above. Lanfear rolls his plane hard to the left, pulls up, and fires a burst from his guns. The Zero spins out of control, crashing into the ocean below, a plume of water shooting up. Lanfear turns back to the second Betty, lines up his sight, and fires. The Betty's fuel tank blows, pieces of the plane flying everywhere. Lanfear pulls up, grinning, and yells over the radio, "We got 'em, both down." But there's a question hanging in the air, one that will haunt the pilots for years. Who got Yamamoto? Lanfear claimed he shot down Yamamoto's Betty. Barber said it was his. The argument got so heated that the Army Air Forces did 3 separate investigations, each one more detailed than the last. Let's get to the facts because history matters. First, Japanese soldiers who were on Bougainville that day found Yamamoto's body in the wreckage of the lead Betty bomber, the one Barber shot down. Yamamoto was thrown clear of the crash, his uniform still intact, a bullet wound in his chest. Second, the lead Betty had bullet holes in its right engine and fuselage, exactly where Barber was firing. The second Betty, Lanfear's kill, had holes in its left fuel tank, and the crew members found inside were Yamamoto's staff, not the Admiral himself. Third, Barber's gun camera footage, which has since been lost, but was reviewed by intelligence officers in 1943, showed him firing at the lead Betty and hitting it repeatedly. Fourth, Lanfear's official report had inconsistencies. He claimed he shot down the lead Betty, but his description of the crash site didn't match where Yamamoto's body was found. Most historians today agree Rex Barber got Yamamoto, but in the heat of the moment, with adrenaline pumping and bullets flying, Lanfear genuinely thought he'd done it. War does that to you, makes the lines between fact and feeling blur. Both men were awarded the Navy Cross, and rightfully so. They'd both done their jobs perfectly. Years later, in 1982, Lanfear wrote a letter to Barber, apologizing for the confusion. "Rex, you were the one who got him," the letter said. "I was caught up in the moment, and I made a mistake. You deserve all the credit." Barber wrote back, saying, "We were a team. We got him together." It's a testament to the bond between pilots, and to the real hero of the mission, the P-38. The plane had gotten them to the intercept point, gotten them into position, and given them the firepower to finish the job. Without the Lightning, Operation Vengeance would have been impossible. The Lightnings regroup and head home, their fuel gauges hovering just above empty. Barber's plane has 11 bullet holes, one more inch to the left, and the fuel line would have been cut, leaving him to ditch in the ocean. Another pilot, Lieutenant Hine, has an engine die halfway back. He glides for 20 miles, then restarts it just in time to make it to Henderson Field. Lanfear's plane runs out of fuel as he's on final approach. He glides onto the runway, the tires skidding in the red dust, and comes to a stop just feet from the edge of a ditch. The ground crew swarms the planes as soon as they land, cheering and slapping the pilots on the back. Lanfear jumps out of his cockpit, yelling, "We got him! We got the big one!" No one knows who the big one is until 2 days later, when Nimitz's headquarters sends a coded message, "Target eliminated. Eagle has fallen." The base erupts in celebration. Men cheer, hug, cry, and pass around a bottle of homemade moonshine, smuggled in by a supply sergeant. In Japan, it's a disaster. Yamamoto was more than a general. He was a symbol of Japanese military might, a hero to the people. The government lied to the public, saying he died in combat during a routine inspection. But the military knew the truth. His successor, Admiral Isoroku Koga, was a good officer, but he lacked Yamamoto's genius and aggressive flair. The Japanese Navy lost its strategic edge that day, and they never got it back. All because of 17 P-38 Lightnings, 17 brave pilots, and a plan that relied on the most revolutionary plane of World War II. Operation Vengeance made the P-38 a legend, but the plane was just getting started. It evolved with the war, getting better and more versatile every year. By 1944, the P-38L model, the most common version, had a water injection system that boosted engine power to 2,800 horsepower, pushing its top speed to 440 miles per hour, faster than most German and Japanese fighters. It became the best photo reconnaissance plane of the war, redesignated the F-5 Lightning, with its guns replaced by high-resolution cameras. F-5s flew over Normandy before D-Day, taking photos of German bunkers, minefields, and troop positions. Those photos let the Allies plan the invasion perfectly, saving thousands of lives on June 6, 1944. In North Africa and Italy, P-38s were fitted. But let's be honest, it wasn't perfect. In Europe, the P-51 Mustang eventually passed it by. The Mustang had a Merlin engine that was more reliable in cold weather, and it could fly farther with drop tanks. By 1945, most P-38s were in the Pacific, where they still ruled. Pilots loved it, flaws and all. "It had its quirks," said Jim Goodson, "but when you needed to get the job done, whether it was escorting bombers, shooting down Zeros, or killing Yamamoto, it never let you down." After the war, most P-38s were scrapped. A few went to museums. One sits in the Smithsonian today, Barber's plane, with the 11 bullet holes still visible in the tailboom. When I stood next to it last year, I ran my hand over the metal. It's cold, rough, and full of stories. That's the thing about the P-38. It's not just a plane. It's a reminder of what happens when you refuse to play by the rules. The P-38 story is about more than engineering. It's about Kelly Johnson and his team working 18-hour days in a converted furniture factory because they believed they could build something better. It's about Rex Barber, quiet and steady, squeezing the trigger at the right moment. It's about Tommy Lanphier, loud and proud, leading his men into battle. It's about all the pilots who flew it, guys who left their families, climbed into a cramped cockpit, and flew into the unknown. They didn't fly the P-38 because it was easy. They flew it because it was necessary. It was a plane that demanded respect and gave it back in spades. It proved that air superiority isn't just about speed or firepower. It's about innovation. It's about thinking differently. It's about having the courage to build a fork-tailed monster when everyone else is building the same old plane. Today, when we talk about World War II planes, we think of the Spitfire or the Mustang. But the P-38 deserves its place in the spotlight. It was the plane that killed Yamamoto. It was the plane that guarded bombers over Rabaul. It was the plane that showed the world what American engineering could do. It was the fork-tailed devil, a beautiful, deadly machine that changed the course of the war. And when you look at its twin booms and sharp nose, you don't just see a plane. You see a bunch of guys who said impossible is just a word. You see a story of courage, innovation, and grit. That's the legacy of the P-38 Lightning. It's not just metal and fuel. It's history. So that's the full story, from a napkin sketch in Burbank to a jungle crash site in Bougainville. If you loved this deep dive into the P-38, hit that like button. It tells YouTube we need more stories like this, stories of the planes and the men who flew them. Subscribe too. Next week, we're talking about the B-17 Flying Fortress, the plane that took the fight to Germany's heartland. And let's debate in the comments. Do you think the P-38 is underrated? Or is the Mustang still the king of World War II fighters? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your take. And if you have a favorite World War II plane, drop it below. Maybe it'll be our next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is the full story of the P-38 Lightning. From the dangerous dream in a Burbank hangar to the moment its guns fell silent over a Bougainville jungle, changing the course of a war. If you believe that history is shaped by these leaps of faith, by machines that were questions in metal, then hit like. Subscribe to join us as we dive into the next legendary weapon of World War II. And in the comments, let's debate. Was the P-38's complexity a fatal flaw, or the necessary price of its genius? Let me know, because I'm willing to bet the pilots who flew it have a strong opinion.